is brought to you by Kuku FM. Download the app now.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम सौरभ द्विवेदी है। ये लल्लनटॉप के सबसे चमकीले कार्यक्रमों में से एक है। चमकीला इसलिए क्योंकि इसमें ज्ञान की बात होती है। इस कार्यक्रम का नाम है किताबवाला। किताबवाला में आज की किताब है द थ्री खान्स। स्क्रीन पर आपको इसका कवर नजर आ रहा होगा। द थ्री खान्स एंड द इमरजेंस ऑफ न्यू इंडिया। इसे लिखा है हमारी आज की जो गेस्ट ऑथर हैं कावेरी बमजाई उन्होंने, और इसे पब्लिश किया है वेस्टलैंड पब्लिकेशन ने। और हार्ड बाउंड की कीमत 599 रुपए है, और आई एम श्योर ई बुक और भी सस्ती होगी, और जल्द ही इसका पेपर बैग भी आएगा, ऐसे आप उम्मीद कर सकते हैं। और ये भी उम्मीद जरूर करिएगा कि ये अन्य भारतीय भाषाओं में प्रकाशित हो।
किताबवाला में कावेरी बमजई से बातचीत का सिलसिला आगे बढ़ाएं उससे पहले एक जरूरी सूचना। लल्लन टॉप का टाई अप हुआ है कुकू एफएम के साथ। कुकू एफएम एक ऑडियो प्लेटफॉर्म है जहां पर आप हर विषय पर किताबें सुन सकते हैं, क्योंकि ये ऑडियो बुक की शक्ल में है। और हम जानते हैं कि भागम भाग भरी जिंदगी में कई दफ़ा निरखना देखना मुमकिन नहीं होता है, और तब ऑडियो हमारे काम आता है। क्योंकि आप लल्लन टॉप के प्यारे व्यूअर हैं, इसलिए अगर आप कुकू एफएम की प्रीमियम मेंबरशिप लेंगे तो आपको एक कोड LT20 डालने पर छूट भी मिलेगी 20% की। आइए शुरू करते हैं अब किताबवाला।
कावेरी बमजाई, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है किताबवाला में। थैंक यू सो मच फॉर जॉइनिंग अस।
Shukriya, Saurabh. You know, I'm a great fan, so I'm delighted and honored to be here.
Same here. Though I have told you earlier as well when we were in the same newsroom,
जी
कि जब बच्चे ट्विंकल कॉमिक्स पढ़ा करते थे तब मैं टुडे पढ़ा करता था, तो मेरे लिए आप सब लोग जिनको पढ़ के मैं बड़ा हुआ, सिनेमा की, पॉलिटिक्स की समझ मिली, इट्स ऑलवेज एन ऑनर टॉकिंग टू यू। थैंक यू सो मच।
थैंक यू।
तो सबसे पहले तो मैं ये जानना चाहता हूँ, जो एक बुनियादी सवाल होता है जो हम किसी भी ऑथर से पूछते ही हैं, कि कैसे आपको ये ख्याल आया कि मैं थ्री खान्स पे बुक लिखूं। और आपसे ये सवाल इसलिए भी बनता है, और जो मुझे इस बुक का यूएसपी लगता है कि ये सिर्फ उनकी फिल्मों के बारे में या उनसे जुड़े आपके मेमोइर्स के बारे में या एनेक्डोट्स के बारे में नहीं है। आपने तीन खान, सलमान खान, शाहरुख खान और आमिर खान की कहानी सुनाते सुनाते हिंदुस्तान की कहानी भी सुनाई है, उसकी पॉलिटिकल हिस्ट्री की बात की है। कहानी शुरू होती है राजीव गांधी के ऊपर किस तरह के प्रेशर हैं, किस तरह की प्रॉमिसेस थी उनके आते वक्त, और उसके साथ खान की स्टोरी शुरू होती है, और वो बिल्कुल मोदी रिजीम 2.0 तक आती है। तो सारी पॉलिटिकल कंट्रोवर्सी, सारे सोसाइटी के चेंजेस, चाहे वो मार्केट के खुलने का चेंज हो, चाहे कम्युनलिज्म का चेंज हो, चाहे नेशनैलिटी को नए सिरे से नेशनलिज्म को असर्ट करने का चेंज हो, वो सब आते हैं। तो व्हाट वाज द फर्स्ट थॉट व्हेन यू डिसाइडेड टू राइट दिस बुक?
Saurabh, one to ये था that my journey in journalism was also in a way coterminous with their journey in cinema. I began in journalism in 1987. They began in cinema and television in 1988.
Yes.
You know, Salman his first film was Bibi Ho To Aisi, where he played the brother's role. Aamir was in Qayamat Se Qayamat Tak, which sort of changed the idea of the romantic hero. And Shahrukh was in Fauji, which was a huge hit at that point. And हमारा तब एक ही चैनल हुआ करता था, दूरदर्शन, सब कुछ एक ही था। तीन खान तो थे नहीं, एक अमिताभ बच्चन था, एक दूरदर्शन था, एक टेलीफोन था, एक गाड़ी थी, अगर गाड़ी थी, if you were lucky enough to have a car. So सब कुछ एक था. And the India that I grew up in was really the India that they grew up in as well. हम एनालॉग जनरेशन है, हमारे जमाने में तो कंप्यूटर भी नहीं शुरू हुए थे। हम टाइपराइटर पे स्टोरी लिखा करते थे, हम पेज बनाते थे, फिजिकली पेज बनाते थे, फिर वो छपने जाता था। कंप्यूटर पे पेज बनाना तो हमारे दिमाग में था भी नहीं। So I wanted to capture a sense of that era and a sense of the promise of the Rajiv Gandhi era, which a lot of people have forgotten now. 1984 was a very critical year when Mrs. Gandhi died, but also a new kind of hope emerged. Rajiv Gandhi was young and, he seemed to be someone who had an idea of how people lived. He was a pilot. He had an ordinary life. He and his wife would go out to eat ice cream at India Gate. वो पुरानी pictures हम सबको याद हैं. And by 1988, something had shifted. बोफोर्स की एलिगेशन शुरू हो गई थी. मंदिर के लॉक्स खुल गए थे. मगर उसी टाइम पे ये भी हुआ था that the voting age had come down to 18, which was really a historic move. Panchayati Raj, the whole idea of it began, the idea of deepening democracy. So there was a sense कि जो हमारे पर्दे पे लोग थे, अनिल कपूर, जैकी श्रॉफ, सनी देओल, ये थोड़े और जो इंडिया इमर्ज हो रहा था, यंग इंडिया, स्टेटिस्टिकली नहीं, ऑल्सो सोशली एज वेल, उसमें थोड़ा मिसमैच था. जब अमिताभ बच्चन पीक पे थे तो इंडिया एंड अमिताभ बच्चन वो ऑलमोस्ट they were growing organically. हमारा भी जुनून था, there was so much नवनिर्माण agitation था, emergency थी, there were so many young leaders who emerged. बहुत ज्यादा अर्बन एंगर था. तो इस टाइम ये हुआ दैट जो हमारे पर्दे पे लोग थे और जब हम देख रहे थे दैट वी वर यंग, हमारे जैसे लोग, वी वर नॉट बीइंग रिफ्लेक्टेड ऑन द स्क्रीन. So I think इन तीनों के आने से that changed. Although Aamir and Salman were very much part of the industry, जो उनका ethos था वो फिर भी काफी middle class ethos था, because they were not super rich. Aamir, in fact, his father had suffered a huge loss because of his film Locket being stalled for 8 years. तो उस समय में the family went through a lot of economic hardship. तो उनकी जो सोच थी दोनों की ही, सलमान की भी, वो मुझे एक टाइम बता रहे थे कैसे उनका एक अंकल था, टाइगर अंकल, जिन्होंने उनके लिए बाहर से रैंगलर्स जीन्स लाए थे और वो उनको सालों तक पहनते गए, क्योंकि उस समय रैंगलर जीन्स होना ही एक स्टेटस सिंबल था अपने में. सो आई थिंक दैट होल ethos I wanted to capture. ये जो मिडिल क्लास इमर्ज हो रहा था इंडिया में, तो what was going on in India and how it was being reflected on the screen, I wanted to show that. And I felt maybe it was a little too, shall I say, pompous of me, but I felt that because I had met all three and because I had observed the careers of all three, I was in a well-placed position, shall we say, to write about them. But of course, there is also the joke that Shahrukh once made to me, that he said that you want to become famous by writing about famous people, which is a typical Shahrukh joke. But well, I suppose that's also partly true.
All right. आपने शाहरुख का जिक्र किया तो वहीं से कहानी
जी
सिलसिला शुरू करते हैं. शाहरुख खान से आपने अपनी पहली मुलाकात के बारे में लिखा और वहीं से बुक खुलती है, शुरू होती है.
जी.
लेकिन शाहरुख खान ने एक दफा आपको थप्पड़ मारने की धमकी दी थी. He threatened to slap you. I want to make it slightly sensational in the beginning of the interview so that जो viewers इसको देख रहे हैं उनको थोड़ा सा हुक मिल जाए कि अच्छा इसको तो देखना है पूरा. जी, शाहरुख खान ने कावेरी बामजाई को क्यों ऐसी धमकी दी that I'll slap that journalist?
उन्होंने मेरा अनफॉर्चुनेटली नाम नहीं लिया. नाम लिया होता तो I would have become even more famous. But उन्होंने ये कहा that he will slap that journalist who's written a story about the competition. I'd written a story in India Today, तब मैं India Today में थी. I'd written a story about the competition between Shahrukh Khan and Amitabh Bachchan. There was a time when Amitabh Bachchan had refused to do KBC, Kaun Banega Crorepati, the show that really brought him back to life in a way, because of issues about the cost. And Shahrukh did it. And there was also a huge amount of tension with Amar Singh. In those days, Amar Singh, the late Amar Singh, was very close to Amitabh Bachchan. And there was this sense that, that Shahrukh was trying to poach into Amitabh's trying to poach Amitabh Bachchan's legacy, and it has always been a fact that Shahrukh has always compared himself to Amitabh. He has never compared himself to the other two Khans, he's always...
This reminds me of that remark which you have mentioned in the book as well, कि अभी लोग कहते हैं कि do it the Amitabh Bachchan way, but मैं चाहता हूँ कि लोग कहें do it the Shahrukh Khan way. This was made. हाँ.
Bilkul. So he was very, Shahrukh has always thought his career through very well, and he's obviously the most intelligent of the lot. Not to say that the other two are not intelligent, but he has always looked at his career in terms of his legacy, whereas the other two have only come to that over a period of time. Shahrukh, I guess, even when he began, was always looking at, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, where will I be? What will I be doing? And he always compared himself to Amitabh Bachchan, partly also because both are essentially Delhi boys and, missionary schools and all that. And Amitabh went to Kirori, which is, a neighbor of Hansraj College. So there was that sense as well. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I wrote about this dispute between them and how there was a lot of bad blood and there were camps in Bollywood. And of course, Bollywood never likes to acknowledge that it has camps, Even now, after the terrible suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput, वो यही कहेंगे, नहीं, हमारे यहाँ camps और cliques नहीं है, हम तो ऐसे ही हैं. We like to work with a few people and that's how it is. So at that point, when I did that story, उन्होंने ये threaten किया. And उसके बाद एक sequel भी है, सौरभ. उसी हफ्ते Amitabh Bachchan came to our conclave because I think Abhishek was speaking at it. So our boss, my former boss and your current boss, asked Mr. Bachchan, so I hope you're not going to slap Kaveree. So of course, Mr. Bachchan laughed very politely and he said, no, not at all. But, हर चीज का sequel होता है. इस story का भी एक sequel.
मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि इस पूरे remark के बाद जब उन्होंने इंडिया टुडे की story पढ़ी and he said शाहरुख खान की I'll slap, पर उसके बाद आपकी मुलाकात तो हुई होगी. So next meeting इस public threat के बाद कौन सी थी?
नेक्स्ट मीटिंग आई थिंक काफी सिविल थी क्योंकि शाहरुख का ये है कि वो 1 साल बात नहीं करेंगे आपसे, फिर सडनली वन मॉर्निंग वो बात शुरू करना चाहते हैं करेंगे एंड फिर वो देन ही वोंट स्टॉप, देन अगेन ही विल सॉर्ट ऑफ गो ऑफ and then again he'll start. So it was quite a regular meeting. I didn't even bring it up. He didn't bring it up because he had not mentioned my name. That was it. We went on as if nothing had happened. And, sort of, this is not very unusual in the industry. You can write the worst things about people, but they will still meet you and talk to you as if nothing has happened, and it could be because they know that no relationship, no friendship is permanent, no relationship is permanent, no enmity is permanent. They've been through so many ups and downs themselves. They know that there's no such thing as any permanent or any consistency. So I think they've got quite used to being written about badly, written about well. It's okay. They just go from, they just coast from, event to event, film to film. Far too much is happening in their life to bother about, one journalist who at some point wrote some story about them. उस वक्त उनको बुरा लगता है, उस वक्त बहुत बुरा लगता है. But their memories are as short as journalistic memories, so it's okay. We also forget. Kitni baar I've written about people and, sometimes 2 years later they've come to me and said, I don't know what you have against me. You keep writing these things about, and I genuinely cannot remember what they're talking about. I remember once Manish Malhotra got Rani Mukherjee to call me and said, what problem do you have with Manish? I said, why should I have a problem with Manish Malhotra? He's a designer, ठीक है. नहीं, you know, in the last 3 or 4 reviews, you've mentioned that his designs for the heroines have been very tacky. I said, yeah, they have been. No, but you know, there must be something you have against him. He feels very badly about it. I said, no, not at all, you know. And in fact, I'd
It's
even
our job,
forgotten.
nothing personal.
Yeah, and I'd even forgotten actually. And now when I meet him, we are the best of friends. Not the best of friends. You can never be friends with anyone in Bollywood. And if anyone tries to be, God help them. Kabhi nahi. Never ever think that they're your friends. I think they know that you're a journalist. You're there to communicate their ideas better, to promote their movies, to promote them. And we know that we are their tools. And we may not always want to promote them. We may also want to criticize them. And we do that as well. So you have to be very careful. This relationship is not one of friendship. If you understand that, then you retain your sanity as well. अगर आप ये सोचने लग गए, अच्छा आज उसने मुझे ये बोला, फिर कल ये बोलेगा, फिर तो आपसे काम होगा नहीं. अगली फिल्म आएगी तो आप सोचेंगे अगर ये मुझे फिर से थप्पड़ मारने की थ्रेट करे तो क्या होगा. You have to forget all that. You have to just regard this as just another subject and just another review.
It's a very great learning, कावेरी, की आप बोल रही हैं कि वो ऑब्जेक्टिविटी आपको हमेशा मेंटेन रखनी है, चाहे आप पॉलिटिकल बीट में हैं. मैंने कई ऐसे रिपोर्टर्स को देखा है कि वो जिस पार्टी की बीट कवर करते हैं वो उसके अनडिक्लेयर्ड स्पोक्स पर्सन हो जाते हैं सोशल मीडिया पर भी और निजी बातचीत में. और यही चीजें मैंने फिल्म बीट के जर्नलिस्ट के साथ देखी हैं कि वो दिल ग्रैब सम कैम, क्योंकि उनका फोन एक कॉल पे उठ जाता है, वो उसमें खुश हैं, या उनकी प्रॉक्सिमिटी या जो एक्सेस वाली बात है. लेकिन ये सब चीजें एक तरफ है, दूसरी तरफ एक पूरी बुक में मुझे एक पर्सनल टच दिखता है. एक पर्सनल टच तो ये है कि जो आपने 1-on-1 इंटरेक्शन किया, राइट, चलते चलते का वो सेट है जहां पर आप शाहरुख से पहली बार मिल रही हैं. आप मॉरिशस फ्लाई कर रही हैं कवर स्टोरी के लिए अमिताभ बच्चन.
Only thanks to my former boss, huh? I couldn't believe it. I had just about joined India Today, Saurabh. So ये बात हो रही थी अमिताभ बच्चन का 70th birthday. उन्होंने एक किताब भी रिलीज करी थी, बड़ी अच्छी सी मोटी कॉफी टेबल बुक. तो हमारे मेरे फॉर्मर बॉस मिस्टर पुरी ने कहा let's do a cover story on him. तो मैंने इधर उधर एक दो फोन करे तो पता चला अमिताभ बच्चन was in Mauritius. So मैंने कहा sir, but he's in Mauritius. So he said, so what? So I said, but how can we do an interview? We can do it on the phone. He said, no, but why can't you travel to Mauritius? I said, well, I can. If you can pay for the trip, I'll be more than happy to go. So he said, so please go. So, I mean, I couldn't believe it, I mean, here I was, I'd just joined just a few months in, and I was being asked to fly to Mauritius to meet Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, what a lovely, I mean, what can be better? And for the editor to say, so obviously, how else will you do this story? And this is something that I wanted to bring out in the book as well, that people like me were enabled to do these stories because we had bosses like Mr. Puri, and who didn't think ki cinema hai, let's not, pay too much attention to it. They understood the power of cinema, and they understood why it was important to cover it, not just as a document of social history, which it is, but also to sort of map the changes that are happening in society. Sometimes cinema reflects it, sometimes cinema is a little late in capturing it, but you always have some sort of relationship between social, political events and cinema. And I thought that was the wonderful learning that we got at India Today, that cinema was really treated on par with politics. In fact, मैं आपको एक और joke सुनाऊं?
Please.
I think this will end up becoming a joke session, which is, of course, again, typical of Shahrukh Khan. I remember when I was made the editor of India Today, as usual, Shahrukh, half the time he's laughing at himself or he's laughing at the person whom he's talking to. So he said, you become editor. I said, yeah. He said, but you didn't tell me. Some people from our office, in fact, had gone to meet him for some, I think it was to do the promotions of Main Hoon Na or something, or Dawn. So he said, so you become editor and you didn't even tell me. So I said, no, I mean, it's hardly something to tom from the rooftops. He said, no, but you should have told me. It's like Atal Bihari Atal Bihari Vajpayee, a poet becoming prime minister. And I thought, kitna खींचेंगे, matlab, how much of leg pulling will go on. But this is the kind of jokes he makes, and it's both witty as well as what he's trying to say. So I found it very funny. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and me, there is no comparison.
When you were narrating this Mauritius anecdote, मुझे ध्यान आ रहा था when Kunal Pradhan flight to US, I had to US for Quantico Priyanka Chopra profile. And when I was reading, I was like, wow, ये कितनी सही job है कि प्रियंका पर profile करना है, तो you go to US, you observe her, you interview her, and then you come back and write.
बिल्कुल. And in fact, US नहीं था, he went to Toronto. वो shooting कर रहे थे Toronto में. And he spent 5 days with her, Saurabh. And we funded that. And, because I think we try to do something different always, India Today always wanted to do something that was a little different. Okay, so we may have been not the first people to write about Priyanka Chopra, but we wanted it to be what we used to call the last word. That India Today may not be the first word, but it'll be the last word in that story. Uske baad nobody will say, acha, isko story ko phir se karo, because we've sort of, set the bar very high, which is now called the gold standard. But hamare zamane mein we used to laugh and say, we're the last word. Kyunki hum last mein aate hain, but we try and do the best job also.
All right. So
this is the India Today that you used to read, Saurabh, and that I was also a part of. अब तो खैर काफी चीजें बदल गई.
हम लोगों ने शाहरुख की काफी बात की, अब थोड़ा सा हम शिफ्ट करते हैं सलमान की तरफ.
जी.
What was your reaction when you met him, Aisha Takia's husband's restaurant, and in couple of days he said, let's shift to our apartment and let's talk there.
Right.
Was it very unexpected, very spontaneous, or?
No, it was expected. I'd been told that he will meet you at his apartment. Then I think he thought, is she worthy of coming into my apartment and, sitting and talking to me for hours and hours. So I think first he wanted to interview me, so he wanted to assess me. Just to explain sort of why he did that, in the 90s and 2000s, although in the 90s he was hugely successful. मतलब क्या फिल्में करी हैं उन्होंने ना, मैंने प्यार किया in 1989, then हम आपके हैं कौन, huge hits. हम साथ साथ हैं, ये सब आइकॉनिक मूवीज हैं. बट उनका जो रिलेशनशिप था मीडिया के साथ वो बहुत ही स्ट्रेन था. He felt that they were always against him and they were only writing about his affairs and only writing about his accidents. अगर आप ऐसा काम करोगे तो लोग तो लिखेंगे ना. I mean, obviously they're not going to turn a blind eye. What you did at American Bakery or what you did in Rajasthan. But he had this feeling that everybody was against him. So he was very wary of meeting journalists, especially journalists he didn't quite know. And I was more or less an unknown commodity because of the fact that I live in Delhi and still, cover Hindi cinema, which is primarily based in Mumbai. So he was not very sure that he would be comfortable talking to me. So we first met at this restaurant and then, I don't know, we just exchanged, I think 2-3 words. And then I don't know what happened. He said, chalo, let's go to my house. And of course, I followed at a discreet distance in my battered taxi. And once I entered his home, in a very nice, small, charming home, of course, that's not the only place he owns. He has a huge farmhouse, Panvel mein, where he has horses and everything possible known to man. But this is where he lives in Mumbai, and he lives quite simply. And there, once he sat on his favorite sofa with his cup of coffee, I think he felt comfortable. And he told me, of course, which he tells every journalist, that you're not to put on your tape recorder. He doesn't like that. He says, if you can remember what the conversation is, you should. Otherwise, it's too bad. So I was only allowed to take notes, which of course I dutifully did. But this is the thing, that he was very, very wary. So Dabang ke time, actually the change started with Wanted, 2009. Boni Kapoor ki film thi. But 2010 mein that makeover had sort of happened, you know. And a new Salman was emerging, who didn't work only with his friends, who, didn't turn up late on sets, who had a work ethic, who finished one film at a time. These were things that Salman had never done before, but he started doing them after Wanted, you know. Usse pehle, if you remember, the series of terrible films, God to See Great Ho, and all sorts of, yeah. मतलब क्या टर्कीज होते थे, नो आई मीन सलमान वाज लाइक मिस्टर एंड मिसेस खन्ना, मैं और मिसेस, ओह मतलब क्या फिल्में थी. So that was really the critical moment, and I think I met him at a time when he was becoming more comfortable with himself, becoming more confident. Till then, he always had this complex that, you know, he had a complex so hai that I think in the family he was never considered to be the one who would be the star. Salim Khan always felt that Arbaz was going to be the star. I don't know how. And always felt that Salman at the most could become a writer or a director. So ek to unka family, you know, you always have that sense that your father doesn't expect much of you, but you expect something of yourself, you know. And you always want to match up to your father. So he does have that enormous complex about his father. ये थोड़ा मैं pop psychology कर रही हूँ, but it's true.
नहीं, मैं इनफैक्ट आपसे यही पूछने वाला था कि when we look at सलमान खान, तो हमें बहुत ही 3-4 शेड्स बहुत क्लियरली नजर आते हैं. एक है सलमान खान एंड सलीम खान की जो केमिस्ट्री है, एक फादर सन वाली, जैसे ऐसा लगता है जैसे मनमोहन देसाई की फिल्म की केमिस्ट्री हो, कि प्यार है लेकिन झगड़ा है, एक दूसरे को गलत साबित करना, जो आपने बुक में लिखा भी है कि when Salman announced that I want to do films and Salim laughed at him, वो सारी चीजें हैं, and that अभी भी उसी घर में रहना है, और अभी एक सेंस ऑफ अप्रूवल की वहां से आए नहीं आए, और अभी भी सलीम खान एक बार बोल देते हैं उनकी गलतियों के लिए. देन दैट रफ फेज जिसमें वो ब्लैक बक वाला केस होता है, फिर वो
नहीं, और उससे सौरभ, उससे पहले भी when Salim marries Helen, yeah, that's a very dark phase for the children, you know. And you know, they're obviously feeling very insecure and feeling very threatened, because no matter what they say now, at that point it was a huge blow to the family. So it definitely affected them. You see a parallel in Farhan and Zoya Akhtar. They also went through a similar thing, but of course, in their case, Hani Irani moved away. But a divorce or a separation or a second marriage, these are things that have enormous consequences for children, and it's very difficult to overcome them, even when you're a 56-year-old man, you know. There is something that remains at the back of your mind and affects you psychologically.
And then the second part, which मुझे पढ़ के बहुत हंसी आई, you wrote Salman Khan Family Employment Scheme. बनरेगा of Mumbai.
But वो है ना, मतलब जो भी, whoever is in trouble, their first stop is bhai, you know. And I think he enjoys that as well.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
he really does feel like a bhai. He feels powerful, you know. He feels that I can resolve these problems. Acha, Suraj Pancholi is accused in a suicide case, chalo, let's adopt him, Zareen Khan has come to me crying, saying no one gives her a chance, chalo, let's take her on. So he has this tendency to, and of course, anyone who marries into the family, to uske to matlab भाग्य खुल जाते. Look at Ayush Sharma. I mean, he's going to be co-starring with him in Antim. He launched him as well. He's his sister's husband. And all the sisters and all their husbands and all the brothers and all their sisters are taken care of. So that's the Salman Khan Bhai employment scheme.
And the third shade of Salman is कि मुझे नहीं लगता कि किसी और खान या किसी और एक्टर की गर्लफ्रेंड्स के बारे में, अफेयर्स के बारे में और अब्यूज रिलेशनशिप्स के बारे में और सलमान के उसके गुस्से के बारे में कि व्हाई डू यू राइट अबाउट माय पर्सनल स्टफ, आपने बहुत भी वो मेंशन भी किया है मेरे नोट्स में, मैंने उसको अलग से मार्क किया कि ही इज वेरी एंग्री कि आप कि आप मैं किसी को मारूं, किसी से प्यार करूं,
हाँ,
आप के बारे में क्यों लिखते हो, आप मेरी फिल्मों के बारे में लिखो.
वो उन्होंने वो वर्ड इनफैक्ट प्यार नहीं यूज किया, वो उन्होंने वर्ड किया कि मैं किसी को मारूं, किसी के साथ सो.
हाँ,
उनका डेफिनेशन भी अजीब है. तो प्यार का डेफिनेशन अजीब है. तो but his relationships have always been public, Saurabh, which is why I spent some time writing about it. And I think it was very important because the Aishwarya phase was a very dark phase in his life, and it was a very dark phase in Aishwarya's life. And I remember it was after she came out of that relationship. I mean, she was literally ostracized by everyone. She had been thrown out of Chalte Chalte because Salman had come and disrupted. But Salman ki galti thi, but she got to pay the price. As always, women in Bollywood always have to pay the price. Then she was going to be in Veer Zara, but because Shahrukh was so afraid that Salman would take umbrage, because at some level they all three are also, I wouldn't call them friends, but they're also sort of they're respectful of each other's choices. So because there was this relationship that had gone awry in Salman's life, Aishwarya lost Veer Zara, where she was supposed to be with Shahrukh. So it was very unfortunate. She was just dropped from films and she had, it was for no fault of hers. But again, it's very interesting. Just like Priyanka, she chose the West and the West chose her. After Devdas, the doors of the West and Hollywood especially opened up for her. Of course, she didn't choose to stay in America like Priyanka did. So she didn't get the kind of work that she would have if she had stayed. There was a time when there was huge interest in her, a little too much, as you know, with Harvey Weinstein also wanting to meet her. And
yeah, I was about to ask because he was trying really hard, और बाद में हमने मीट मूवमेंट के दौरान देखा कि किस तरह से बहुत सारी एक्ट्रेसेस ने, बहुत सारे लोगों ने उनके खिलाफ एलिगेशंस लगाए.
बिल्कुल, but he didn't get the chance to meet her because she had a very good agent. So I think what happened to Aishwarya as a consequence of the relationship with Salman, which was abusive, and she went on record to say it was abusive, which was very brave of her. She's perhaps one of the first, we don't give her enough credit. She's perhaps one of the first Indian actresses to actually come out and talk about sexual harassment from a very, very powerful actor. It's not very easy. But at that time, remember, Saurabh, she also then chose the protection of Subrata Roy Sahara. And that was very important for her. She needed an equally powerful anchor to counter this powerful enemy she had made, because she had lost so many movies. And so she needed both this powerful anchor in India and she needed this growing career in the West. And to a certain extent, she did a few films in the West which were quite successful, but she never quite reached the heights that she could have. But that was, I think, a very deliberate choice. She didn't want to move to America and engage full time with Hollywood, which is what you have to do if you want a full time career there.
I was slightly surprised when I was reading this book और आपने एक जगह अल्ट बालाजी जी की एक बहुत ही लेसर नोन सीरीज का एक डायलॉग कोट किया, आप अपनी कहानी लिखो वरना कोई और लिखेगा. Do you watch that alt Balaji kind of stuff? I'm not judging you, I'm just curious.
Saurabh, I watch a lot of things. I watch everything. I wouldn't watch Gandhi Baat, which I think is a little too much. But I do watch a lot of things. And I wanted to quote that because I wanted to show exactly how democratic now entertainment has become. That we are consuming everything. We will consume the White Lotus, HBO's big new hit right now, which is a satire on the rich and powerful. We will also consume a Bichu Ka Khel. We'll also consume, hopefully we won't consume Gandhi Baat, but I don't judge people who do. But I think I wanted to show the kind of swathe of things that people are now consuming. And I also, as a consumer, want to see what people are watching.
All right. From here we'll switch to आमिर फॉर अ वाइल और उसके बाद हम बुक की थीम्स पे और डिटेल में बात करेंगे. लेकिन उससे पहले जो एक चीज मैं अपने व्यूअर्स को, खास तौर पर दर्शकों को बताना चाहता हूं कि क्यों, why is it not your regular cinema book? Though I love reading regular cinema books and biographies as well, और कुछ रिलेटली अच्छी बायोग्राफीज लिखी भी गई हैं, चाहे वो राजेश खन्ना के बारे में हो, चाहे वो गुरदत्त के बारे में हो,
यासिर उस्मान
ने सारी बायोग्राफीज लिखी. वी हैव फीचर्ड हिम इन किताबवाला, या फिर छाबड़ा साहब ने, असीम छाबड़ा ने जो लिखी है इरफान खान के बारे में,
बहुत ही अच्छी, बहुत ही उम्दा किताब.
बिल्कुल. Was it a conscious effort कि आप जब इस बुक को लिख रही थी तो आप आशीष राज्याध्यक्ष, आशीष नंदी, विश्वनाथन, ये सारे लोग जिनको हम लोग एकेडमिक सर्कल में पढ़ते हैं, सिनेमा और सोसाइटी, उनका म्यूचुअल इम्पैक्ट एंड देन थ्योराइजिंग स्टफ, उनको आपने बहुत एफर्टलेसली, आप एक एनेक्डोट सुना रही हैं, कुछ बता रही हैं, फिर एकदम से उसका थ्योरेटिकल पार्ट या आइडियोलॉजिकल पार्ट बता रही हैं.
Saurabh, मुझे लगता है कि this, I want to go back to the original idea of giving cinema its due place in society. There is this whole discussion: what is lowbrow, what is highbrow? What is lowbrow culture, what is highbrow culture? I genuinely believe there's no such difference. I genuinely believe that anything that is has a following, small or big, is worthy of study. And if people are following it, people are finding validation in it, people are watching it to see themselves on screen or to see what they want to become or just to escape, there has to be some reason why it's so powerful and why it's so seductive and so attractive. And I feel that all the people that you mentioned, I've had conversations with them over a period of time. I've been covering cinema, of course, for 30 years, but really seriously, I would say for the past 20 years. And I've always had these conversations with them, trying to understand each moment that we are in history, whether it was the 90s, which was such a fractious time, or the 2000s when we suddenly felt that we were the center of the world, which was such a big con, or the growing fundamentalism and this growing sense of divide that we are in currently. I think cinema is a very powerful way of understanding that as well. And to understand cinema, you also have to see what is going on at that time. So I felt that these conversations have always enlightened me, and I wanted to, present them to the reader as well, whether he or she likes them or not. But just to tell you that a Bichu Ka Khel can sit in the same book as Ashish Nandi, and
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with it. And you should
Yes.
celebrate it, because that is what India is. Like, we are everything, you know. We're
Yes.
We're Indian Idol 1 minute, and then, you know, another minute we're talking about the economic crisis. We're talking about Virat Kohli's beard 1 minute, and another minute we're celebrating the amazing success of Mirabai Chanu. Comes from nowhere, literally. And this is the India that is so marvelous, despite all the politicians and what they want to do to us. Its diversity is such a wonderful thing. And it's a diversity in tastes as well, in aesthetics as well. And we should try and record it all. And recording is something that I was very particular about. Saurabh, I feel that we don't record enough. That's why, you know, I find this current move towards biographies in cinema very good. And I think it's, you know, it's great that Yasser, in fact, spent time with Lalita Lajmi and spoke to her about her memories of Guru that had not been done before, you know. Asim spoke to each and every director that Irfan had worked with, almost, to understand him. So these
Gives
are
you a clear insight about their
Bilkul.
body.
So these are very important things. Even if you study just their cinema, even if you don't look at their personal lives, and Asim has spent more time studying his cinema, those are very significant things. And, you know, looking back 20 years later, hopefully we will be able to look at these and, you know, use them for our records, use them for our understanding, for a new generation of the filmmakers, film lovers, and, you know, hopefully they'll read these. If I mean, people like us and our books still survive.
So let's switch to आमिर खान now. जैसे वो मीडिया में होता है ना कि वो अब तो फिर भी थोड़ा बात करने लगे हैं, कभी पानी फाउंडेशन, कभी फिल्म में. मुझे लगता है कि ये शाहरुख का यूएसपी रहा है कि he was always media's darling, giving sensational bites, being chivalrous at times, और वो उनको पता था how to deal with it. He's smart thing, he's well read and he can crack jokes. सलमान का था कि वो जो बीइंग ह्यूमन वाला फेज उनका शुरू हुआ, बड़ी पीआर एक्सरसाइज और फिल्मों का हिट होना, और उसके बाद उन्होंने आउटरीच शुरू किया. पर आमिर, was he always slightly awkward, slightly in his own shell while talking to people? क्योंकि अवार्ड सेरेमनी हो या इंटरव्यूज भी हो, was it always like this? How do you look at his trajectory, Aamir Khan?
I think Aamir ka ye hua that, you know, by the time Lagan and Dil Chahta Hai came, that they were both in 2001. There was a lot going on in his personal life, you know, and by 2005, we know that the divorce happened, he remarried, and of course, he's separated now from Kiran as well. That phase was a very difficult phase for him. He went through a lot personally, and he talks about it as well. He started drinking 1 Bacardi bottle a day, often with Salman, and he put on a lot of weight, and you know, that was he felt that something had broken in him, and, you know, he's a perfectionist. He doesn't like any part of his life to not sit well with the other, and he was also going through I mean, the films were sort of, there was The Rising that he was working on, which he worked on for 2 years. Casting troubles happened. So after that, around 2006, 2007, he started looking around and he realized, my God, I mean, I have these enormous hits. I made Lagan, which went right up to the Oscars, and it was a very well orchestrated marketing campaign. Single-handedly done by him. Rising had a very well orchestrated marketing campaign, but he was only appearing to the media when he had to sell or market a film. But he realized that, you know, there is this Shahrukh Khan who is the media's darling, and is so because he's so accessible. And he also hired a new PR agency. Till then, he had this very old-fashioned secretary cum publicist who used to handle all his work. Mr. Rao, I remember he was called, a very typical old-fashioned Bollywood type, Then he had this PR agency, Spice, and he had people like Prabhat Chaudhary and Shilpanda sort of advising him. And their strategy was very clear that he was going to be projected as the most commercially successful actor as well. Because till now it seemed to everyone that Shahrukh was the more commercially successful actor. What happened after Zameen Par, what happened after Fana was that Aamir started this whole 100 Crore Club began with Salman, but Aamir started setting newer and newer records, So Gajni became 200 crore, then, something else became 300 crore, something.
300 crore, PK 300 crore, sorry.
Bilkul. So then he started setting these new records, and at the same time, there was also a very conscious outreach to the media. And he decided that they were not necessarily inimical to him. He till now that feeling, and a lot of that feeling has also was engendered in these two, Salman and Aamir, because of the film press in Bollywood. But because now stories started appearing about cinema outside the film press, there was Outlook, there was Week, there was India Today. The mainstream magazines were covering these in a very serious way. They felt more empowered to come and talk to the mainstream magazines. I remember for Lagan, I was not in India Today then, but I remember for Lagan, Aamir had organized a special screening for the editor and the reporters, even before it was released, because he was so convinced that it ought to be on the cover of India Today. And indeed, even before it was released, it was on the cover of India Today, saying that it was perhaps the greatest gamble ever in Indian cinema. And indeed, it went on to become one of the greatest epics in Indian cinema. So this is again something that was a very conscious decision on the part of Aamir. That he would then reach out to the non-film press. And by then, the non-film press was everything. Times of India, HT, Delhi Times had started, HT City had started. They were covering cinema on a daily basis. And of course, the television channels, So there was so much more media now that they didn't need to, just rely on the film media. And I think that was the big change that happened.
आपने मेंशन किया कि जब आमिर की सलमान से दोस्ती होती है, बकार्डी वाली दोस्ती, डार्क फेस वाली दोस्ती, दोनों लोग रफ फेस से गुजर रहे थे. इट वाज जेसिका हाइंस, आई बिलीव, जो मेरे ख्याल से व्हेन वी लुक एट आमिर्स बायोग्राफिकल डिटेल्स, तो जो सबसे ज्यादा कंट्रोवर्सी आती है दैट ऑथर राइटर क्लेम्स कि उनका जो बेटा है, जान नाम है शायद उसका, क्लेम्स कि आमिर उसके फादर हैं और वो सब चीजें हैं. और पर मैं जब इन तीनों लोगों की स्टोरी देखता हूं तो मुझे वो स्टोरी सक्सेस और फेल्योर की स्टोरी के अलावा कमबैक की स्टोरी भी बहुत, दे सर्वाइव, दे सेल्ड थ्रू इट, दे ऑलवेज दे कीप कमिंग बैक. इसमें अब मैं थोड़ा सा आई वांट टू डिस्कस द पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ दैट मीडियम. एंड बिफोर वी डिस्कस द थ्री खान्स, एक जो एपिसोड मैंने आपकी बुक में पढ़ा, मैंने अलग से मार्क भी किया और मुझे शॉकिंग भी लगा कि सिनेमा के पैरेलल टीवी चल रहा था और टीवी कैसे चेंज हुआ या किया गया कि तारा जैसे सीरियल एब्रप्टली बंद किए गए, बिरता नंदा को दरवाजा दिखा दिया गया, और जो चीज सूरज बड़जात्या लेकर आते थे, दैट यूटोपियन रामायण फैमिली, बड़ी सी फैमिली और सब ठीक हो जाएगा, उसी को फिर एकता कपूर लेकर आती हैं. और तो एक तरफ केबीसी की गैम्बलिंग चल रही थी, एक तरफ सास भी कभी बहू चली थी, और टीवी चेंज होता है लगातार. आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट यू टू टॉक अबाउट दैट विंता नंदा चंद्र प्रकाश द्विवेदी एपिसोड, बिकॉज दैट वाज वेरी शॉकिंग.
Yeah, but it happened, and sort of this was something that was very significant, which is why when I wanted to look at that phase, because that where we are currently, is a direct result of those changes that were taking place. So at one level, you had the consumerism that we worshipped, but it was because it was sanctified by knowledge. In KBC, it was money, but you got that money through wisdom. So wealth and wisdom was an irresistible combination. This is something that Indians have always believed in. You invest in education and you will get the results, you'll get a good job, you'll get a good income. So KBC was an ultimate synthesis of this idea that wealth will bring you wisdom, which is why I believe. And of course, then you had a host like Amitabh Bachchan. So here you have one show that is literally worshipping consumerism, that is worshipping wealth. You have a crore ka check, which Rupert Murdoch, by the way, insisted. He said you have to have a big sum of money, and a crore. Not that he knew what a crore is. It had to be explained to him how many zeros there are in a crore, and he said, "Yeah, that looks like a good sum." But at the same time, there was a tremendous amount of social anxiety, and I think ये हर society में होता है that when there is an enormous economic change taking place, there is also social anxiety that happens. When you look at Brexit, it's the result of economic downturn as well as a huge amount of social anxiety. Job losses translates to migrant hate, translates to a feeling that, let's go back to the kind of England we once were, whatever that was.
Yeah.
So I think the same kind of thing was happening in India at that point in the early 2000s. And these serials, which were actually very progressive, small town girls coming to big cities, living together, having sex outside marriage, these were things that were seen as not Indian. And there was a tremendous amount of social anxiety also because of the kind of foreign serials, although they were not that successful. And that resulted in the rise of, Hindi soaps eventually on all the channels. But the bold and beautiful and all that at that point.
Yeah.
And at that time, there were lots of people who, used to file. I remember there was one Pramila Nathwani in Mumbai who would regularly file PILs about, vulgarity and obscenity on the small screen. So I think this was very significant that they felt they had to put the woman back in the home. That she was perhaps, outstepping her boundaries. They had to bring the family and the undivided Hindu was not specified, but it was understood. The undivided Hindu family had to come back at the center of everything. So although these families were rich and very much consumerist, and you could see it in the jewelry and the saris that all these women were, and these became consumable items later. I mean, you could see that Tulsi would wear one kind of sari, then you have the same saris all over Karol Bagh, So these became both places where consumerism could be worshipped, but at the same time, family values and the Hindu way of life, shall we say, was very much in control. So it was a sanctified consumerism. And for that, it was very important that these women, these young women, unmarried young women, all the Saas, for instance, Saas as well, Nina Gupta's Saas,
Yes.
if you remember, that was also thrown out because, here was a divorced woman who was finding new love, and she and her ex-husband were trying to co-parent what, Aamir talks about now, conscious uncoupling, trying to co-parent the children. So that kind of thing was too radical at a time when anyway you were so insecure economically. So I think socially. So I think this was something that was very important, that they felt, the people who were going to be in power, and at that time they were in power, and they were definitely going to come back to power, and they did in 2014. The seeds of it were laid in the early 2000s, in 1999, in 2000s, when the first NDA government was in power. And we don't feel it, but it happened. When Sushma Swaraj gave industry status to the film industry in 1998, there was also an undeclared resolve that we make the kind of patriotic, nationalistic movies that resulted in movies like Sarfarosh and Gadar and Hero. And this is something that Mr. Modi then articulates later in 2014 when he, much later, when he tells Bollywood, you must make nation-building cinema. In those days, it was not articulated so well, but it was understood. And the message went down to the wire, down to people like Chandra Prakash Trivedi, who's very much part of the system now as well, is making an enormous film on Prithviraj Chauhan for Yash Raj. So a lot of these seeds, Saurabh, I felt they had to be written about and they had to be recorded, because sometimes we forget. Sometimes we forget how we ourselves have had allowed all this to happen. And either we didn't pay attention, or we thought, it's okay, it's not a big deal. But we should have paid attention. We should have wondered why all these serials suddenly disappeared.
And I found it very amusing and intriguing कि जो हमारे मौजूदा प्रधानमंत्री हैं नरेंद्र मोदी, वो इन 3 खान्स की स्टोरी में बार-बार आते हैं। और सबसे ज़्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग था कि कैसे पांचजन्य जो आरएसएस का मुखपत्र है, माउथपीस है, वो एक स्टोरी करता है जोश की रिलीज के बाद, एंड द असर्शन ऑफ दैट हिंदू हीरो थिंग। और फिर मेरे ख्याल से आउटलुक मैगजीन उस वक्त के बीजेपी के जनरल सेक्रेटरी नरेंद्र मोदी से रिमार्क मांगते हैं, है ना? So
isn't that fascinating, Saurabh?
Yes.
But that shows you कि ये thinking क्या है, and ये accident नहीं है that both Advani and Vajpayee were film critics for Panchajanya. उनको भी समझ थी कि सिनेमा कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है, तो वो भी फिल्म क्रिटिसिज्म से निकले हैं किसी एट सम पॉइंट और द अदर। तो सिनेमा का रोल सभी को पता है कितना पावरफुल है, खान्स का रोल सभी को पता है कितना पावरफुल है, तो ये बहुत जरूरी हो गया था कि इसको कंट्रोल किया जाए। और दैट इज वेयर वी कम टू वेयर वी आर नाउ कि ये कुछ भी बोलते हैं तो इन पे लोग झपट जाते हैं
because of their religion, इसीलिए सलमान को बोलते ही नहीं है।
बिल्कुल। अब मतलब और क्या कारण है, मतलब अगर आप अपनी बीवी से सेपरेशन कर रहे हैं और आप सबको बहुत सिविलाइज तरीके से बोल रहे हैं कि हम सेपरेट हो रहे हैं, हम को पेरेंट करेंगे, नहीं आप लव जिहाद, यू आर इंडल्जिंग इन लव जिहाद, व्हाट डज दैट हैव टू डू विद सेपरेशन? I mean everything is seen through the prism of आप बोल रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान should play in IPL, हाँ तो please go to Pakistan, मतलब why should you go to Pakistan? Your father, I mean Shahrukh's father came from there, he fought for freedom and he came from there to from Peshawar to Delhi.
कि अब शाहरुख ने जो बेंगलोर में उनके रिलेटिव्स के बॉक्स में अपने पिताजी का ताम्रपत्र
जी,
that always reminds me of that film घातक, जिसमें वो अमरीश पुरी का कैरेक्टर बार बार अपने ताम्रपत्र का जिक्र करता है।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। और ये भी बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है कि हमारा जो 80s का दौर था उसमें हमारे हीरोज कम थे, विलेंस ज्यादा थे। और ये मुझे इंटरेस्टिंग लगता है क्योंकि आई थिंक वो सोसाइटी इतनी चेंज हो रही थी कि हमें पता ही नहीं था कि हमारे हीरोज कौन हैं। और ये जो 3 थे, अनिल, जैकी और सनी, हाँ ये थोड़े मतलब they were not exactly people that you looked up to. They were also playing pretty ordinary guys, and villains were very powerful. आपके शकाल थे, Mr. Mogambo, and all villains who wanted to destroy India, So I think जब society में, जब cinema में villains become more powerful than heroes, that also tells you something about that phase, the 80s phase. And I think what it tells us is that's why we needed these 3 young men who came from quite different backgrounds, and suddenly we felt, chalo, we have someone we can identify with, we've had enough of Mogambo, we've had enough of Shakal, let's go back to uncomplicated romances. To okay, we have a Bazigar and Anjam, and we have Dar, but let's go back to DDLJ, let's go back to Maine Pyar Kiya, let's go back to Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, let's go back to the cocoon of the family,
And something you can aspire to be.
बिल्कुल.
I mean, you can, मतलब अपनी फैंटेसी में भी आप रिलेट कर सकते हो. आप अपनी फैंटेसी में ऐसे नहीं कि मैं जाके करप्ट पॉलिटिशियन को गोली मार दूंगा, ये कोई नहीं करता. They
मतलब
want to
कौन
be
करता है?
family man.
You want to be a good brother, you want to be a good son, you want to be a good husband. So, I mean, this was something that these guys validated. So they validated the idea of the middle class, that we want a good life. We want to wear DKNY, we want to wear Gap, but we also want to sing the national anthem, and we also want to pray, we also want to go to temple. So we want it all, and we want everything.
I really like the chapterization of the book. Then there were 3, and then Split Nation and Divided Stars, where you talk about 93 to 99.
Gee.
And the year of reset, going global, revenge, retribution, and self-reverence, and a new order for a new India. मैं ये चीज जानना चाह रहा था, जैसे आपने तमाम जिंदगी लिखा है, जर्नलिस्टिक राइटिंग की है, एडिट किया है, सो थोड़ा सा इजी हो जाता है उन लोगों के लिए बुक लिखना क्योंकि आपने वो काम किया है, या यू स्टिल नीड दैट दूसरों का ओपिनियन, एक एडिटर जो आपके काम को डिसिप्लिन कर सके?
मुझे तो एडिटर की बहुत जरूरत होती है सौरभ, बिकॉज और क्या हुआ था दैट आल्सो व्हेन वन बिकम्स एन एडिटर, तो sometimes you forget how to write, so that was one of the reasons I also left India today, because I was actually not writing that much. Your work becomes more administrative and more sort of, ye organize karo, wo organize karo. And at some point, see, writing takes a lot of practice. And you have to read, you have to think, you have to write, you have to sleep on it, wake up again, think again, write again. And if you fall out of practice, it can be a terrible thing. So I am always very grateful for good editors, and I was very, very lucky. एक तो जो publisher है वो ही बहुत अच्छे editor है, but I have a very good friend, Nasreen Muni Kabir, who very kindly agreed to edit this book. She took
such a wonderful,
absolutely, and
such a good writer,
and she knows the subject so well. She's done 2 fabulous documentaries on Shahrukh Khan. I would recommend them highly if you've not seen them. The Inside World and the Outside World of Shahrukh Khan. The Inside World is just brilliant. She, I don't know, it was like a gift from God. She agreed to edit it, and I thought, my God, I can't ask for anything better. And I would just send her the chapters, and she would just send them back to me with red lines and yellow lines. And I would be so grateful that someone is looking at my copy and being my editor. That it's not very easy. Even if you've been writing for so many years, sometimes you need someone else's perspective to guide you as well. Because आप क्या है कि आप एक ही दफा में सब कुछ लिख रहे हैं, फिर किसी को आके देखना भी पड़ता है कि अच्छा ये फ्लो ठीक है, ये आपने चैप्टराइजेशन ऐसे किया है, हाँ ठीक है, बट maybe you can add this here or that here. So I think it's very, very important to have a very good reader, and if that reader is also able to edit, nothing like it. Very, very important. I would not advise any writer to just go ahead without a good editor. Everyone, I think, needs a good editor. And I was very lucky.
So I'm very tempted to ask about the Shahrukh Salman का झगड़ा, क्योंकि वो एक जो 2-3 हम लोग चीजें देखते हैं ना, 3-4, जिसमें एक जो आपने बुक में लिखा है, where सलमान इज सेइंग कि मैंने शाहरुख को हमेशा अपने छोटे भाई की तरह समझा है ना, और फिर वो जो झगड़ा होता है मुंबई में दोनों का, और ऐसा झगड़ा कि बीच बचाव और हाथापाई जैसी नौबत आती है। फिर वो आमिर का एक ब्लॉग पोस्ट आता है कि मैं शाहरुख नाम के कुत्ते को बिस्किट खिला रहा हूँ, दो आमिर लेटर अपोलोजाइज टू शाहरुख किड्स। तो ये जो इन तीनों की राइवलरी है, एक तो इन तीनों की इंडिविजुअल ट्रैक हैं जिनके साथ हम एसोसिएट करते हैं, कई बार नहीं करते हैं। और एज यू मेंशन्ड, खासतौर पे जब मतलब जो सबसे ज्यादा हमको फैनेटिक या कट्टर फैन बेस दिखता है वो सलमान खान का दिखता
बिल्कुल
है ना। मतलब वो लड़ने लड़ाने के लिए उतारू हो जाएंगे, और कितनी भी खराब फिल्म हो उनको तो देखनी ही है।
बिल्कुल। और सौरभ, मैंने किताब में भी लिखा है, बट अगर आपने नहीं देखी हो तो ये जरूर देखिएगा, बजरंगी बीइंग भाईजान। ये
जी
इतनी अच्छी डॉक्यूमेंट्री है सलमान खान के फैंस के ऊपर। इट रियली मेक्स यू अंडरस्टैंड कि ये
Yes.
क्या है, व्हाट इज द अट्रैक्शन दैट ही हैज टू फॉर दीज फैंस। एंड ये सब स्मॉल टाउन्स के हैं, इंदौर नागपुर के हैं, बट इट्स ब्रिलियंट, बहुत ही अच्छी है,
It's like
देखिएगा
that
कभी।
anecdote of Kashmiri militant, the Pakistani militant, not
जी
Kashmiri.
जी
Pakistani militant, वो राधे भैया वाला लोग तेरे नाम का एंड
बिल्कुल।
रोली नाम।
अगर आपको याद होगा विशाल भारद्वाज की फिल्म में यू आर
Yes,
दैट
yes, yes, those
ट्विंस,
two, प्रेम एंड प्रेम।
बिल्कुल, हैदर, यू नो।
So I was saying कि तो
हाँ
जी, हाँ मैं कह रहा था कि एक तो इन तीनों का इंडिविजुअल ट्रैक है जिसके साथ हम कभी एसोसिएट होते हैं, कभी नहीं होते हैं। लेकिन एक जो इन तीनों की आपसी केमिस्ट्री है उसमें लोगों की बड़ी दिलचस्पी होती है कि इनकी राइवलरी में, और उसमें ये एक बड़ा चैप्टर है इनका झगड़ा
जी
शाहरुख सलमान का। एंड देन दैट बाबा सिद्दीकी का पार्टी वेयर दे
हाँ, मतलब झप्पी पप्पीज
एक
एंड ऑल दैट।
रियूनियन वहां पे होता है, एक
जी,
फराह खान की शादी में होता है। तो क्या हुआ था उस दिन?
तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत ही कल्मिनेशन था कि बहुत चीजें इन दोनों के दिमाग में चल रही थी। देखिए, सलमान had become part of that दीवानगी दीवानगी song, you know, in मैं हूं ना, which was a blockbuster song, which Aamir never agreed to do, although Farah chased him for
ओम शांति ओम, नॉट मैं हूं ना।
Om Shanti, sorry, Om Shanti Om. So although Farah chased him for days and days and days, Aamir very clearly, although he told her that he'll try, and don't forget that Farah first began as a choreographer in his movie Jo Jeeta Wo Sikandar, so he has some regard for her, but at the same time, he was never going to be part of it, and basically उन्होंने उनको लटका के रखा. But Salman went out of his way to be a part of that song, and you know, that day everyone on the sets had a great time. Now, basically, Salman wanted him to return that favor, and Shahrukh was not doing that. So that really bothered Salman. And in the process, when they had this birthday party, this whole thing came up, and there was a lot of ugliness that was brewing, and it ended with basically Salman telling Shahrukh that you've always thought that I'm a duffer, essentially that I'm less intelligent than you, but I've always had the better women. And then Shahrukh, of course, suggests that maybe he's had them too. मतलब उसके लिए आपको डिटेल्स के लिए किताब पढ़नी तो पड़ेगी.
let's not go there. Ask your ex.
हाँ, but उसके बाद there was a long conversation he had with someone who has told me on record, but without giving away their name. Salman was furious, and he decided that he's going to show this guy that he will be far more successful than he could ever imagine. And that then in a way fuels his comeback, and that rage fuels his desire to prove that he can be a superstar as well. Of course, that is not the only thing that must have fueled that, but that was a very significant falling out at that point. And what is ironic is now again, when Shahrukh has seemed in trouble, Salman has again in a way came to his rescue in Zero with the special appearance. He's come to his rescue again with Pathan, where the last part of Pathan will actually have Tiger making an appearance. So it'll be like a superhero franchise. So it's interesting that Salman also gets angry but also forgives. But that fight, I think, was very critical in the change that happened in the way Salman looked at himself, looked at his career, and decided that he has to do something about it. And he did. So it's quite a remarkable comeback.
And when we look at Salman and Aamir, they were quite at ease with each other.
Yeah, but not during the making, not during the early part of their
अंदाज
careers.
अपना अपना पूरा
Yeah, everyone
not
knows that.
during 90s.
Yeah, but in the 2000s, they sort of were very comfortable with each other because Aamir was clearly working in a very different space, you know. He was working even at a time when Sultan and Dangal seemed to have almost similar storylines. Aamir was never bothered because he knew the film he was making was quite different from Dangal, from Sultan. So they've always had that sort of camaraderie, which has been quite above and beyond box office numbers. And I think that comes from the fact that Aamir gets so totally dedicated to the film that he's doing at that point. He really doesn't think about anything else. He literally is a character who goes from one film to another. And the time in between is spent in preparing for the new film or marketing the old film. So his life really is a series of films. There's that private life that he has is a very, very, very small part of it. He really is his cinema, you know. And Salman doesn't have that kind of complete dedication or devotion, and neither is he interested in that kind of dedication and devotion. So they in a way complement each other, that one is little easygoing, the other is completely obsessed with cinema. So there's not much competition between them. And in Aamir's case, the commercial success seems a byproduct of the search for excellence, whereas in Salman's case, the commercial success is the main goal. If the film becomes good and excellent as a byproduct, say a Bajrangi Bhaijaan, which I thought was an excellent film, then it's a great thing. But the prime motive is to make a blockbuster. Whereas in Aamir's case, it's the opposite. So that I think it's a question of it's a thing of, you know, opposites attracting, you know.
All right. Now I have two questions and one response which I'm going to ask to you. पहले दो क्वेश्चन मेरे ये हैं कि who is your favorite Khan? मुझे बुक में आइडिया लगा है, but I want to know. इन तीनों में आपको कौन सबसे ज्यादा पसंद है?
I think it's quite obvious. It's Shahrukh. I find him.
When I was reading the book, I was like, okay, तो दो कावेरी बमजाई is very objective. उन्होंने सब controversies के बारे में सब पे बात की है, but वो बहुत clearly दिख रहा है कि
I think it's just a case of sneaky kind of admiration for his intelligence and a wish and a hope that it would translate onto the screen. But in the 2010s, we have not seen any of this intelligence on the screen, unfortunately, except briefly in Fan. The movies have been a series of terrible choices. So it's a wish and a hope that जो आपकी innate intelligence है, वो आपके cinematic choices में भी reflect हो जाए, तो, you know, why not?
And what's this hospital connection with all the Khans? Somebody is telling you about this Dubai-based hair transplant surgeon. Somebody is calling you when you fell ill in Berlin.
Patani, it's a coincidence or whatever. But I remember that, you know, this Salman has a very odd sense of humor. So I kept asking him about his transplant one day, you know, and I said, you know, I believe you've had it, and, you know, so how did you go about it? So he kept humming and hawing. Then, you know, at the end of the conversation, he said, you know, it seems you have a very personal connection to the idea of a transplant. I said, no, nothing like that. He said, no, I'm pretty sure someone in your family is bald. And he sits down and writes the number of this hair transplant surgeon in Dubai. And he says he's the best ever. And just give him my reference and go to him and all your problems will be solved. It happens, of course, that my husband is bald, but there was nothing that, there was no ulterior motive to my question. It was just an honest question. I was intrigued by his lack of hair, and suddenly he had a full head of hair, which we all know he had a transplant.
How did Sarish Bhattacharya reacted to this when he
Sarish Bhattacharya laughs at everything, and whenever I tell him any such thing, he says, you must write about it. So that's what I do. Whenever something like this happens, I write about it.
All right. So
what
my
was
second
the best advice?
Yes. So my second question is कि if you have to pick one film, all three Khans, their most challenging और best work, या आपको लगता है कि जो उनका एक DNA है, उनका जो सबसे important element है, वो उसमें सबसे ज़्यादा reflect होता है. So what will be your pick?
My pick is a very surprising pick, I think, for most people, but I find it perhaps the most moving film I've seen recently is Swades. I find that what it stands for, the idea, you have that moment in the film where Shahrukh Khan turns around and tells the village, wo keh rahe hain that India is the greatest country in the world and all that. And he turns around and he says, no, India is not the greatest country in the world. It can be, but it is not. I thought that's such a powerful statement. And अगर वो ऐसी फिल्म अब बनाएंगे तो उनको तो बोला जाएगा पाकिस्तान नहीं, आप तो अरेबियन सी में चले जाओ. तो उस समय ये बोलना 20 कब की बात है, 2004 की बात है. और जो सारे वैल्यूज उस मूवी में थे और जो कितना ब्यूटीफुली उस मूवी को शूट किया गया था, उसके गाने, उसका ethos, and it changed a lot of lives as well. Saurabh, बहुत लोग,
especially that Javed Akhtar song about Ram.
बिल्कुल, I mean,
रावण को मन से निकाले राम उसके मन में, बहुत प्यारा गाना है,
बहुत ही अच्छा गाना. And when Shahrukh says that Ram और रावण दोनों ही अपने मन में हैं, you have to choose. Those are very powerful sentiments, and I find myself still, when I watch it again and again, I find myself really resonating with it, and I feel it is truly a magnificent film, which perhaps for whatever reason didn't get its due. That was a year
that cameo of Makaran Deshpande and that song "Hi Chala Chal Rahi" and Gayatri Joshi. तो she was very new और बहुत ही एक फ्रेशनेस थी और वो एक बहुत रोमांटिक सीन है जिसमें वो उनकी धोती बांध रही है.
Oh, I was about to say that is one of the most seductive scenes in Indian cinema. Yeah, बहुत ही seductive.
ये आजम वाला सीन जिसमें वो दिलीप कुमार मधुबाला के चेहरे को पंख घुमा रहे हैं. Yes.
Seductive नहीं, I meant erotic. बहुत ही erotic scene है, and वो कितनी अच्छी तरह दिखाया गया है. I just loved it.
Oh, I love that film. I love Swades.
Yeah, I just love it. I think it is one of the, उसमें सब कुछ है, everything that we look for in Hindi cinema. It has laughs, it has tears, it has beautiful music, it has a wonderful romance, it has this wonderful relationship he has with this Kaveree Amma. उसमें उसका नाम भी कावेरी था, maybe that's why. But बहुत ही अच्छी चीजें थी उसमें. अगर फिल्म बनाई जाए तो मुझे लगता है it has, वो checklist होती है ना कि 10 on 10 इसमें 10 on, उसमें सब में I think I would give 10 on 10.
और इसमें कितनी लेयरिंग है सीन्स की, जैसे जो हम लोग को हमेशा लगता है कि जब तक इंडिया भारत के लिए अपने दरवाजे नहीं खोलेगा तब तक उनको रीच करने का हक नहीं है, तो वो जो अपनी कैरावैन का दरवाजा खोलता है उन बच्चों के लिए.
बिल्कुल it's so, मतलब हर चीज में. And when he goes to meet that Dalit,
गौरव रखा है. जी
मतलब who is it who can who can not be moved by that movie?
All right, so that's Swades, mutual admiration.
बहुत
What
ही
about
अच्छी फिल्म है.
Amir Khan? His favorite film?
Amir Khan's uh, it's a little difficult. Three Idiots. I mean, I don't know. It was also a phase in my life where I think I watched it with my children, and I don't know. Did we watch it 4 times in the hall, 5 times in the hall? And I remember now, if you would laugh at the Balatkari joke, I mean, people will slap you.
Yes.
You know, they will not allow you to make that joke. But there was something so wonderful about that film. It was just perfect again, you know, and it.
But that's not primarily Aamir film. I'll say that's primarily a Rajkumar Hirani film and the chemistry film. No?
Yeah. But I still think that that's my favorite Aamir film. I mean, I really enjoyed that. I would call it my favorite.
Okay. And Salman?
Salman, I loved Bajrangi Bhaijaan. I thought that was a movie that, again, is just so beautiful, you know, and, you know, his character of this underachiever, जो काफी a lot of people relate to that in India. That underachieving middle-aged man, उसको पता नहीं है वो क्या कर रहा है. His father is an RSS worker, वो हनुमान भक्त है, उसको ये लड़की मिलती है, he has to do this about her, and you know, rising above and beyond your sort of ordinary existence. And then to have at the end of it that scene where you know, the two countries meet in a way, again for me is something that I find very, very moving. And the journey that Nawaz and he and the girl take, it says a lot. It's again for me a very powerful film.
Yes. And very very political film as well. मतलब उसकी एक है कि
बट वो कबीर खान की सारी फिल्में ऐसी होती हैं, एंड आई एम ग्लैड वो किसी ना किसी को तो ऐसी फिल्में बनानी पड़ेंगी, अदरवाइज हमें खाली शेरशाह जैसी फिल्में देखनी पड़ेंगी. ठीक है, वी लव आवर हीरोज, बट देयर इज इन इंडिया बियॉन्ड जस्ट you know, warmongering and celebrating our war heroes. We love them, and a film like that, a film like Uri celebrates them. But there has to be something that talks about peace as well.
All right. So my last question for this interview is, जो जहां पर आपने किताब भी खत्म की है, सेकंड लास्ट एंड लास्ट पैरा, कावेरी बमजाई की का सजेशन, रिकमेंडेशंस कि अब इन तीनों खान को 3 डेकेड्स के बाद क्या करना चाहिए, व्हाट शुड दे एक्सप्लोर?
ये तो अनसोलिसिटेड एडवाइस है, मैं तो ऐसे ही दे रही हूँ, वो करे ना करे.
प्लीज गो अहेड, एवरीवन लव्स गुड एडवाइस.
But मुझे लगता है that Aamir has to continue doing what he's doing, not make movies like Thugs of Hindustan, which are clearly not his idea and not his baby. He has to go with his gut and make the films that he wants to make, and make the films that he is powering. Okay, so he's making a Forrest Gump remake, ठीक है, but hopefully he'll make it in his way, you know. And it'll be a very unique film. It has to have that Aamir Khan signature. You know, a film that he's lived with for 2 years, 3 years, which he's sort of completely absorbed in, and then he will come to the world and present it, and we will appreciate it for what it is. Salman, I think, will go on to, you know, I think he'll go on doing this for another 10 years at least, as long as it's clicking. हाँ, वो और क्या करेंगे? You don't expect him to become a dramatic actor at this point. उनको तो ये करना ही पड़ेगा. It's a tiger that he cannot get off. But there's nothing wrong in it. I mean, the Tiger franchise is quite fun, actually. I quite enjoy it. And I will be very sorry that it won't have Girish Karnad anymore. I thought the relationship between him and Girish Karnad, the way they portrayed in Ek Tha Tiger, was so lovely, you know, that mentor and mentee relationship, and uski dal or uska pension and all that. But Shahrukh, I feel, is the one who has to take the biggest risks, I think. And he has to take a risk now. He has to step out of this comfort zone. And I think he should do mature love stories. There's space for it. He should act with women who are his age rather than half his age. My dream would be a film with him and Madhuri Dixit playing their ages. And why not, when you can have that with the Meryl Streeps of the world, Nicole Kidmans of the world? Why can't our heroes and heroines play their age as well?
Yeah.
You know, so that would be my advice, that just stop thinking about the 100 crore and 200 crore and 300 crore club for a change. This is to Shahrukh. Just do something radical. Do the kinds of films that you did when you chose a Swades or when you chose a Chak De. You did that after all. Go back to it, you know. Go with your gut.
थैंक यू सो मच कावेरी बामजाई, आपने इतना
मैंने
वक्त दिया।
बहुत बोला, आई एम सो सॉरी।
नो यू डोंट हैव टू बी सॉरी। और मैं अपने व्यूअर्स को सिर्फ ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि आपने इस बातचीत में जो भी सुना वो इस किताब का बहुत छोटा सा हिस्सा है। इस किताब में थियरी के लेवल पे, एनेक्डोट्स के लेवल पर, किस्सों के लेवल पर खूब सारी रोचक चीजें भी हैं, ऐसी चीजें भी हैं जिनको देख के आप नए सिरे से सोचेंगे अच्छा ये ऐसे भी था क्या। और मैं आपको पर्सनली बताऊं, मैंने बहुत सारे नोट्स लिए। कल मैं जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल आई वाज सिटिंग इन माय स्टडी घर पे रात के वक्त, मैं एक बार रिवाइज कर रहा था पूरी बुक को आज के इंटरव्यू के लिए
जी।
एंड माय वाइफ एंटर्स इन द रूम एंड ऑल ऑफ अ सडन शी इज लाइक कि तुम ये क्या देख रहे हो, बिकॉज आई वाज वाचिंग द फैबुलस बॉलीवुड वाइफ्स। I always used to make fun of this कि यार ये किस तरह के शोज हैं, लेकिन आपने जो कि बुक में मेंशन किया है द लास्ट एपिसोड, तो आई वाज वाचिंग इट कि अच्छा ये लिखा है तो कैसे दिखाया था। तो ऐसे बहुत सारे मैंने नोट्स लिए हैं कि मुझे ये वाली डॉक्यूमेंट्री देखनी है, ये ऐसे करना है, ये वैसे करना है। सो थैंक यू सो मच फॉर राइटिंग दिस बुक, द थ्री खान्स एंड द इमरजेंस ऑफ न्यू इंडिया। ये वेस्टलैंड से बुक आई है एंड आई होप कि आपका इतना लंबा एक्सपीरियंस रहा है और अभी चल ही रहा है तो आप आगे भी इस तरह की किताबें लिखती रहेंगी। थैंक यू सो मच किताबवाला में आने के लिए।
थैंक यू सो मच सौरभ।
थैंक यू,
रियल प्रिविलेज। थैंक यू।
ऑलराइट,
बाय।
किताबवाला का ये एपिसोड आपको कैसा लगा, ये बातचीत कैसी लगी, कमेंट बॉक्स में जरूर बताइए। और कौन सी किताबें हैं, कौन से ऑथर्स हैं जिनसे हमें बात करनी चाहिए, उसके बारे में भी आप सुझाव दे सकते हैं। आज के लिए इतना ही। थैंक यू सो मच, शुक्रिया।